we had looked at muscles and muscle activities in chapter 9, and there we looked at the structures of muscles, the anatomy, general anatomy of muscles, how the muscle fiber, the muscle units, the muscle fiber, the fascicles, and then from the muscles, we talked about the endomysium, the perimysium, and the epimysium. We talked about how muscle contracts, how that calcium ion is not just important for the the strength of your bones, but they are also very important for muscle contraction. How that ATP are very important. We talked about how the muscles um, have how muscles are regulated with regulatory proteins and contractile proteins. About how contractile proteins are the actin and myosin, and regulatory protein are the tropomyosin and troponin. Talked about how calcium leaves the sarcoplasmic reticulum, then goes ahead to uh, bind to troponin, which we unlock tropomyosin on the active site on actin. All right. So those are a few things we looked at on muscle and muscle tissue. So in muscle and muscle tissue, we're not looking at the muscles actually. We're looking at this anatomy, the general anatomy of the muscles, and the way they perform contraction as controlled by the nervous system. You remember I told you in those in that chapter that the muscles does not control themselves. I don't just decide that I want to move my lower limb by myself. By the lower limb, right? The lower limb doesn't just decide to contract. The lower limb doesn't just decide to move. What this determines it is the response, the impulse that comes from the hypothalamus. And that was why I was telling you that I have a 10-year-old now. 10-month-old. When my 10-month-old sees fire, she's not going to act the same way I'm going to act. Why? The reason is because the nervous coordination is different, right? So a movement at the site of fire outbreak is not going to be the same as my movement at the site of fire outbreak. We both have muscles. We both have lower limb, we both have upper limbs. But the difference is the nerve coordination, the nervous system. Somebody who has brain damage as well, stroke, CVD, is not going to be responsive when they see fire. They can't contract the muscles, not because the muscles are not there, but because the part of the brain that controls the muscle is already damaged. So they can't do anything even when they see danger. All right. So I told you that the interpretation of every action or every observation is in the brain. The hypothalamus make decision of what to do, then the muscle follows suit. So we say that the stimulus comes to the brain processes the stimulus, generates action potential, then the neurotransmitter send the action potential to the to the muscles, and it gets to the motor end plate of the muscle on the sarcolemma, the membrane of the muscles. All right. So we just want to go ahead and look at what the muscular system is now. All right. So we are just going deeper into the anatomy of the nervous system, of the muscular system. Then after that, we'll go ahead and look at the nervous system as well and see the details of how the impulse, the stimulus are processed in the nervous system. All right. So generally, what are the function of the muscular system? So the muscular system include voluntarily controlled muscles, which are the skeletal system. All right, the skeletal muscles. So when we are talking about the muscular system, we are majorly talking about the skeletal muscles that are located almost everywhere you see bones in your body. All right, and the three major functions that they perform they produce movement. So they help with movement. All right, they help with movement. They help for stability. And you remember I was telling you in previous chapter that if some of little children that have cerebral palsy, for instance, now they cannot sit. The reason some of them cannot sit is because if you look at the muscles at each side, either the stomach, the abdominal muscles, or the back muscles, either of them is weak. And when either of them is weak, they will not be able to maintain stability in that area. And so, even though they have the ability to sit, but they cannot sit because the muscle in a particular area is it's weak. So stability muscle is what helps to maintain stability. It's like there is a force and there's a resistance force. There's an applied force, there's a resistance force. That's the function of muscle. Muscle also helps to produce heat. And so you know that somebody who is skinny like me will likely get cold, feel cold more than someone who is not as skinny as myself, right? So muscle helps to prevent heat loss. It helps to insulate, it helps to uh, it supports insulation, right? Which helps to produce heat. All right. Now, when you look at muscles have uh, three major paths that are very, very important. The first part of muscles that are quite significant is the origin. The origin simply means where the muscle originates from. Then we have the insertion, which is where the muscle inserts into. Then between the origin and the insertion, we have the belly. Now, this is analogy of insertion, of origin. Now, look at this door, for instance. If you look at this door, there is a point on this door that, as I'm opening now, there's a point on the door that does not move. That is the origin of the door. The point where the door has the hinge, that is the origin. That part does not move. However you move the door, that part is immovable. That is the origin. So every muscle also have that origin. So if you look at the muscle on the screen now, the origin of that muscle is on the proximal part as it comes from the pectoral girdle. So that is the origin of the muscle. And then this is the belly, all right? And then where it closes, that is the insertion, right? This point, which is the insertion, is what it's the point that stretches out, that moves when there's need for muscle to contract. All right. So the origin is the part that does not move. So you see that is a part that does not move. It does not move when the muscles shortens or when the muscles contract or relaxes. All right. So we call the tendon there, the tendon of origin. You see that is normally the proximal part, just like this muscle you have there. That is the proximal path there. All right. Now, the insertion, like I said, is a part that is movable. All right. And that is the tendon there is called the tendon of insertion. Right. Then you have the fleshy portion of the muscle, which is like the body of the muscle. So we call it, it's more like the body of the muscle. All right. The body of the muscle, but it's called belly, muscle belly. All right. Now, the reason we call it muscle belly is simply like you see how it protrudes, like the way the belly protrudes too. So that's why we call it muscle belly. All right. So skeletal muscle, they shorten and they pull on two skeletal elements, which is the point we talked about already. So some muscles cross one joint, others cross more than one joint. We'll talk about that as we go. Now, tenosynovitis, anytime you hear vitis or hitis rather, it's inflammation. Teno is from the word tendon, and this is from the word synovia. You remember we talked about synovial joint uh, in chapter 8, and we talked about how they have synovial membrane that secretes synovial fluid. Said synovial joints have cavities, and those are the joints that secrete synovial fluid. Then you remember we talked about the knee joint, the shoulder joint. Those are synovial joints. All right. So when there's inflammation of the membrane of the synovial joints, that is what we call tenosynovitis. So there's inflammation of the tendon sheet, the tendon sheet, and the synovial membrane surrounding certain joints, particularly the wrist, the elbow, the shoulder. That's what we call tenosynovitis. Now, when there's inflammation, there's going to be pain. And that could be as a result of trauma, it could be strain or too much exercise. So that's why there's always wisdom to know when to exercise and when not to exercise. There are some exercise that are ideal for some stages. There are some exercise that are not ideal. If you have consistent knee pain now, there are some exercise that will be right to help the joint. There are some exercise that doing it will be like adding more pain to the joint, which is going to be causing more trauma to the joint and not helping the joint. All right. So there is usually need for balance to know when to do what and when not to do what. All right. So at this point, we are going to be looking at the arrangement of fascicles. Now, don't forget we talked about fascicles in chapter 9, and then we said that muscles are first have muscle fibers. So muscle fibers are the same thing as muscle units. Muscle cells, which are the same as myofibers. Remember? And now we say that muscle fibers or myofibers or muscle cells, they are surrounded by endomysium. And then we said endomysium comes in bunch. And we said that a, a group of endomysium that forms a bundle of endomysium, we call that bundle of endomysium. So we say like this is one endomysium. This is um, one muscle cell. This is another muscle cell, another muscle cell, another muscle cell. Now, each of these muscle cells, they are surrounded by endomysium. So each of them surrounded by endomysium. When they come together, they form a bundle. The bundle they form is called a fascicle. So here is a bundle of muscle fiber or muscle cell. The bundle is called a fascicle. Now, each bundle now, for it to be a bundle, they have to be covered to be covered together, to be protected, to be bunched together. That bundle of muscle fiber, we call it fascicle. We say that is covered by perimysium. And more than one fascicle, like let's say 4, 5, 6 fascicle, are joined together by epimysium. Now, we want to say that when you have this fascicle now in a muscle and you have more than one fascicle, how are they arranged? So most fascicle have different kind of arrangements. They could be arranged like a leaf pattern, like the same way you see penates on leaf. They could be arranged in the same way in a circular manner, And now when you look at my mouth, you see that the muzzle, there's a circular muzzle here. When you look at my eye, you see that there's a circular muzzle here. That's a circular arrangement. They could be arranged in a way that they are converging. All right. So you talk about the deltoid. We're going to talk about that. They could be arranged in a diverging or converging manner. So let's go ahead and look at those ways. So all we are looking at is that we know that every cell have muscle cells. The muscle cells are gathered in the fascicles, and the fascicle are arranged in different form to form a muscle. So we want to see those arrangements. All right. So within a muscles are arranged in bundles, and the bundles are called fascicle. All right. Now each fascicle is surrounded by perimysium. Now in each fascicle, fibers are parallel. All right. Those are the muscle fibers. So when we say fiber here, we are talking about muscle cells. All right. They are arranged in each fascicle in a parallel manner like this. Right. These are parallel to each other. Parallel to each other. Now we now want to see in a muscle how her fascicles arranged. Now, this can happen in 5 particular patterns. Can happen in a circular pattern, parallel, fusiform, triangular, and pennate. So let's go. The longer the fiber in the fascicle is, the greater the potential of the range of motion. All right. The greater the cross-sectional area of the fascicle, the more the fiber, the greater the force that can be generated from that from the fascicle. Now, most muscle represent a compromise between the range of motion and force generated. So now let's go ahead and look at those fascicles. Now, the fascicles. Number one, we have the parallel. And when you talk about the parallel, you think about the bicep here. This bicep, now the reason we call this bicep is that it has two bellies. Now this bicep is okay, so the muscle here is called bicep brachii. Brachii is because it's in the arm, and the arm is called brachium. So the name of the region most of the time determines the name of the muscle. So like you have a muscle around the femur now, we call it femoris. So it's just saying that it's around the femur. You have a muscle around the abdomen, it's called abdominis. It's simply saying abdomen. Now you have a muscle between the ribs, then we call it intercostals. Inter means between. Costa means costal cartilage. So you call it external intercostals because it's more outside. Then we have internal intercostal because it's more inside. All right. So that's the way muscles are named. You have a muscle in the butt. We call it gluteus, because the butt is called gluteal region. All right. So the name for the butt is gluteal region. So we call it gluteus maximus, gluteus minimus, gluteus maximus, and medius. All right. Now, so if you look at this, you have the bicep brachii muscles, and if you look at the arrangement, that's the muscle here. You see that the arrangement is parallel. It's just parallel to each other. It's just parallel to each other. So we call it parallel muscle. And if you see the muscle here, you see that they are just parallelly arranged. So that's the first arrangement. The second arrangement is the convergent. And when you are looking at the convergent, you are looking at the pectoralis major here. So the muscle here is pectoralis major. And the way to think about this is pectoral girdle. You can still remember this from chapter 6. This is pectoral girdle. All right? Chapter 6 and 7, right? So this is pectoral girdle. Right? This girdle is pectoral girdle. So the muscle here is pectoralis major because it's the muscle around the pectoral girdle. So pectoralis major. Now, if you look at the muscle, you see that it has a wider beginning and then converged at a point. then converge at the point. So this is called convergence. So that's the measure. Okay, yeah, this is called converging because it's converging. It's converging. It's all converge at the point from a wider region, converging at the point. So pectoralis major. Now, we call that convergent. That's another way that 5 fascicles are arranged. Now, you know that each of these are fascicles. This is a fascicle. This is a fascicle. This is a fascicle right here. This is a fascicle. This is another fascicle. Now, you see the fascicles are arranged in a way that they start wide at the base and then converge at the point. That is a convergent muscle. Another kind of muscle is unipennate. Now, think about it when you see a leaf. I'm focusing on bipennate now. When you see a leaf, leaves most of the time they have this arrangement of veins. They have this venation on their vein, on the leaf that have this arrangement, like 2 pages of a book. All right, that's the way leaves are usually appear. You have the veins arranged that way. So if it has one leaf, now think about it. This is unipennate means like one leaf page, one side of a book, and bipennate means it has the 2 sides. All right, so that's the unipennate. You see it in the extensor digitorum. Like extensor digitorum now simply means that they help with extension, and you know, to extend, when we're dealing with joints, you know, extension means to extend the angle of a joint and restore it to normal position. So like now, if I want to extend this digit now, I want to extend it. This is flexion. This is flexion. I flex it by reducing this angle. This is flexion. I've reduced the angle there. Now, extension is to restore it to normal angle. This is extension. All right. Like this now, this is normal. I mean, this is extension now, normal angle. Flexion, extension. All right. Now, so when we say extensor, it means they help to do extension. And digits, it means they are around the digits. All right. So that's it. Now, rectus femoris, it means it's around the femur. All right. So when you say rectus femoris, it means it's around the femur. Excuse me, please. So rectus femoris means it's around the femur, femoris, and rectus means that they are straight. All right, rectus means they are straight muscles. We'll talk about that more. Now, multipennate means that it has more than 2. You see, this is unipennate, bipennate, this is multipennate, and you can see this is one, this is another one, this is another one, this is another one. So it has about maybe 8, 9, 10 thereabout, depending on the arrangement. So it's multipennate, and you see it around the deltoid muscle, which is the muscle right here, the deltoid muscle. Then the last category are the circularis. Now, the circularis, or the circular muscle rather, the circular muscles are the muscles that are circular, and I've told you about 2 of them. We have the circularis oris, which is the muscles of the mouth. Then we have the circularis oculi, the muscles of the eye. Now, sorry, we call it orbicularis. Now, the word orbicularis is from the word orbit. And you know, orbit is circular. So circular muscles is simply mean, so orbicularis is actually simply generated from the word orbit. So orbicularis. Then if it is around the mouth, it is orbicularis oris. So it means circular muscles of the mouth. If it's around the eye, orbicularis oculi, circular muscles of the eye. So those are the general arrangement of muscles. Now, on the functionality of muscles, we have basic and routine structures or routine patterns for muscle contraction. for muscle actions and movement. And I'll talk about some of those basic compartments, and then we will discuss how they perform their functions. Now, so this is just like a general ways that muscle act. Sometimes when you look at this, you may feel like this is not necessary, but you will see that is necessary later when I begin to talk about agonist, antagonist, synergy. So you want to pay a little bit of attention now so that you understand this liver system. Now, the liver system is simply like how muscle works. Now, when you look at a liver, and now when you say liver, this is not the liver of, think about it as leverage, all right? Don't think about it the liver of respiration, all right? Now think about it as leveraging on leverage. And I'm trying to see the best thing to use to explain it to you. I don't know if any of you will know wheelbarrow. Do you know what they call wheelbarrow? Wheelbarrow.
Yes.
You know it, right? Okay.
Yep.
Sure.
Oh, okay. That's great. I don't know you guys will know it. Now, when you want to use a wheelbarrow to carry something, now you know you're going to put on the wheelbarrow, there is a point where you hold the wheelbarrow, and there's a point where the weight of the wheelbarrow is, because wheelbarrow only have one wheel, right? Usually, or it may have two, but the two will be at the front. Now, you are going to put force at the back here. Then at the front is where the load is. And now in the middle of it, there's going to be, so you are pushing it from the back. There is the wheel at the, more like at the front, and the load is at the center of it, thereabout. Does that make sense? Now you put the load inside the thing, right? Then there is a fulcrum. Now, where the wheel is, where the tire is, we call it a fulcrum. All right, great. We call it a fulcrum. I'm happy you guys know it. Now, where the wheel is, we call that the fulcrum, and that is what you see here, fulcrum. Now, where you put the load is where the load is. We call that the load. That's the resistance. Then myself that is pushing it, I am applying force. Now, when my force is more than the resistance on the load, that is when I am going to move forward. If the load is too much and my force cannot overcome the load, then that's going to be a problem. I'm not going to be able to move. All right. Now, so the fulcrum is very important because that's what gives the balance. Now, let's go and apply this knowledge to muscles now. I'll look at the liver system, then we'll go ahead and use it. Now, so a liver system is a specific arrangement of a liver. A liver is like a rigid structure such as bone now in this case, that can move around a fixed point. So the fixed point is the fulcrum. Now, more like the fixed point in a wheelbarrow is that point where you have the wheel. That's actually the fixed point. So two forces applied affect movement of a lever around the fulcrum. Number one is the load, and number two is the applied force. Now, look at this image here. Here is the load here, which is also the resistance force or load. Here is the effort, which is the same thing as the applied force or the effort. And here is the fulcrum. Now, okay, I'll come to this later. So the load is the resistance force that opposes the movement. Load in the liver system of the body is the weight of the body path. So the weight of the body part is the load, or perhaps if I'm holding this now, it's adding to the weight as well, to the load. Now, the effort is the applied force on the lever by the contraction of the muscle. That's the effort. Let's go. Now, this is the first class of lever. And if you look at this, you see the load here. So that means your head is bearing the load. Now, you see that even as I'm doing like this, there's a point that is not moving. That is what is coordinating the movement. This is the point of the movement. So here is the fulcrum. This point is the point that is the fulcrum. And you know that as I'm moving this, the muscle contracting are the muscles here. So you see the force that is allowing this movement is these muscles here. All right. You see the muscles are there. And if you are touching it and doing it yourself now, you see that the muscles are shortening and elongating. As I'm contracting it, they shorten. As I extend it, as I relax it, they elongate. Now, that is how. So here you see that's where the applied force is. So the muscles here are the one initiating the movement, whereas this is the fulcrum. So you have the fulcrum here, and then you have the muscles applying the force here, and this is the load. Now that is the one of the first classes. I mean, the first class rather. All right. So that's the first class lever there. You see the load there, the fulcrum here, and the muscle contracting to cause the force to overcome the force here. Now, if by any chance this head suddenly becomes too large, too heavy for these muscles to bear, it means that the load is more than the applied force. And so this person will not be able to move the head like that because the load has become heavier than the force applied. So the fulcrum is between the load in the first class lever. The fulcrum is at the middle of the load and the applied force. This is similar to what you see in scissors and scissors. If the pair is further from the fulcrum than the load, if the effort is further from the fulcrum than the load, then a strong resistance can be moved. Example now, the head on the vertebral column. All right, so that's it. The weight of the face is the load. The joint between the skull and the atlas is the fulcrum, and the effort is the posterior neck muscles that are doing the contraction. Now, class 2, now you see in class 1, the fulcrum is here. So that's an example of the movement that happened on your head now. For class 2, the fulcrum is not at the middle. All right. So this is exactly what you see in wheelbarrow that I explained earlier. The fulcrum is where you see that wheel. You see the fulcrum is here. This is where the balance is. You are here holding the wheelbarrow here, and you put some load on the wheelbarrow. And that is what you see here as well around your calf muscles there. All right. Here the calf muscles. This is where the force of contraction is. Your load is right here. And you know, when I taught bones, when I taught appendicular skeleton, I told you that your weight comes right there and fall on your femur. As your load rests on your femur, then it goes straight to the tibia. And I told you your weight does not fall to fibula at all. Your weight goes to tibia, and then your weight goes straight to talus and calcaneus. And so as I'm standing now, I'm actually standing on the bone that we call the heel bone, which is the calcaneus. So I'm standing on my calcaneus as it were now. And you know that as I'm standing on my calcaneus, what is giving me balance is actually the tip of my phalanges. And that's why when the great toe is gone, you may not have balance and not be able to walk. Because if you are thinking of walking, you know you stay actually on your big toe. Like as I'm limping now, I'm doing, it's my great toe that is doing that. So when you think of the way you move, you know that the fulcrum is actually on your great toe. So we have the same form of arrangement, the same form of movement, like what you see on the wheelbarrow, because your stamina is actually, your weight goes straight to the calcaneus. That is the load. But the fulcrum, which is actually what is giving you the balance, is actually the hallux there. Is the hallux, which is the great toe there, giving you that balance. So once the great toe is gone, movement cannot be straight. Movement cannot be smooth. Your gait will definitely be affected. And so when I have my niece and nephew buying Jordan, buying Air Forces, and when they want to walk now, they can't walk straight again because they don't want it to crease. And I kept telling them that, see, by the time you see the impact of what you are doing on your walking, on your gait, gaits. When I say gait, I'm talking of GAIT, which is walking, right? When you see the impact of what you are doing on your gait, you will know that it is this shoe that bought you, and you are not the one that bought the shoe. So I asked them, did you buy this shoe or this shoe bought you? Because the way you are doing now is that the shoe is the one wearing you. You are not the one wearing the shoe. So because when you are no longer making your fulcrum, because what they are now doing is this: they are not they are not they are not using that fulcrum as the great toe, the hallux again, because if the hallux is still the great toe, then you have to maintain it for stamina there to act at the fulcrum. If it's not acting at the fulcrum, then there's going to be a problem. It's going to affect your gait later. It's going to affect that gait much later over time, because your body structure now, your movement is going to change, which will definitely affect a lot of things with your lower limb on the long run. It may look gradual, it may look insignificant today, but doing that. So that's the fulcrum there. All right. So that's it there. That's the fulcrum. That's the load, and that's the applied force. So we have this arrangement just like the wheelbarrow. Now the third lever system, and now you can see I talked about the first lever, which is what applied to the head. Talk about the second lever, use the normal the weight, our weight get to the calcaneus, which is the load. Then we get the balance, the fulcrum on the hallux. Then the force comes in from the calf muscles. Now, the third lever system is what you see around your arm. Now, when you look at this, the fulcrum in this case is here, the resistance is here, and then you have the effort. Now, so the effort in quotes now is between the fulcrum and the load, which is different from the two orientations we have seen, right? So you have the effort between the fulcrum and the load. So in quote, think about it as this effort is located here, and this fulcrum is here, then the load is here. So don't let that arrangement confuse you. So you have the fulcrum, effort, and load. Effort is the same thing as applied force, like I told you, right? So think about this. You want to carry something now. So I have this bottle of water that I want to carry, and then I have this bottle of water that I want to carry. What is going to happen? For me to carry this, I have to overcome this force, this load. The load now, the resistance force, right? Load is resistance force. I have to overcome it. But which muscle are contracting? This muscle, my bicep. So as I'm moving forward, you notice that the bicep are contracting, shortening. All right. Now, so the load. Now, when you do this now, you notice it on your biceps. All right. So that's here is where the contraction is, applied force. This is the fulcrum at my elbow, and the load is the bone itself coupled with what I'm holding with it. All right. So that is, all right. So the effort is between the fulcrum and the load, most common in the body. It favors speed and range of motions rather than force. Example, muscles like bicep brachii that flex the forearm. Load is the width of the forearm and the hand, plus whatever is held in the hand, like what I just did now. The fulcrum is the elbow. Effort is contraction of your bicep. Now, I will now go ahead and look at some kind of movement or some kind of ways to link these things together. Now, when you look at this case, what we just did now, what we just did in the third lever system now, for me to to flex my elbow joint, you will notice that the muscles that will become hard to become contracted that initiate this movement are these muscles here. And you will notice that these muscles will suddenly become hard. You see the belly of the bicep becoming quite hard. This muscle is the muscle responsible for this action. So my bicep is the one responsible for this flexion. All right. Now, this is the muscle responsible for this flexion here, bicep. Now, this muscle is the main muscle here. We call it the muscle, which is the prime muscle. Now, that prime mover, we call it the agonist. So if I'm flexing my elbow now, this muscle, the bicep brachii, is the agonist. And then, now, for me to flex, now please think about this with me critically. For me to flex my elbow, and I am doing it with coordination and with the contraction of this muscle, it's not just like this. You know, as I'm doing this, it could just flap like this. It's not doing that. It's not just flapping. As I'm moving it, it's coordinated. That means there's a resistance. Now, you know, you open some doors. When you open some doors, if you just open it, it just bang on the wall. And now, later they decide to now put a string to prevent that door from just banging. And now when you open that door now, it doesn't just bang because there's something preventing, there's something acting contrary to that force that is flexing the door. Does that make sense to you? Let me know if it makes sense.
Copy
All right.
that.
So it's something that makes it not hyperextend.
Very good. Now, very good. So now, as you are flexing it, now this is the same thing I'm saying now. As you are flexing your elbow, there is a muscle here that is making it not to just flap, that is making it not to just shut, just the same way that some doors have this thing that helps them not to just, if you open this door now, you see this door now, you see it's going back by itself. You see it's going back by itself because there is a resistance force contrary to the force that is flexing it. So now, when you are flexing these joints, and you know why they do that for doors, is number one, for security, but actually, this is it. If this door, when you open it, it just open by itself, then it's going to keep spoiling that wall there. That's part of the reason they do it for doors. So they do it in a way as though to also make the door close by itself after you open it. If you don't want to leave it open, it will close by itself because there's a spring. And you see that thing up there? That is actually what is on the door that makes it to do that. There's that thing there. That is giving a resistance. So this is actually what I'm saying. So now this muscle here is the muscle, this bicep is the muscle responsible for this flexion. However, flexion cannot just happen by itself in a coordinated manner if there is nothing contrary to it. So there's a muscle that acts contrary to the flexors. So that muscle is what we call antagonist. All right, is what we call antagonist. So this muscle here is the one flexing. However, this is helping to oppose the movement that this flexor is doing. This flexor is doing. Now, what that is doing actually, it gives you a smooth coordination. It gives you a coordinated movement, and it also gives you balance. All right. Now, so this muscle here, when we are talking of flexing the elbow, this bicep is going to be the prime mover, which is the agonist. Then the muscle here, which is the tricep, bicep tricep brachii, this muscle is the muscle that we call the antagonist because it's resisting this force that this guy is bringing. Just that this guy up there is resisting the force that the hinge is doing on the door when I'm opening the door. That's the same way it is. Now, so when the agonist is moving in a direction, the antagonist is opposing it. So this antagonist here. So for this movement now, you see the bicep is going to be the agonist in this movement, which are the prime mover, and the antagonist is going to be the tricep behind it. So tricep behind at the back is going to be the antagonist. Now, think about it. When this muscle is moving, what do you think is going to be happening to the muscle here? The brachioradialis here, what do you think is going to be happening to it? Will it be contracting? When this is contracting, will this be contracting or relaxing? Try the movement and see. If you are contracting this, is contracting the bicep, will the brachioradialis be contracting or not? Just feel it and let me know. Is it going to be contracting? The brachioradialis here, is it going to be contracting or relaxing? You touch your muscle when you are making that movement and see if it's going to be hard or not, or soft.
I have too much adipose tissue to tell.
What do you say?
Like I have so much tissue there, so I can't tell.
Don't worry. Okay, yeah. So I'm getting responses. Now, this is when you are contracting this bicep here, what happens here is that this also contracts. If you touch it, you will notice that as this hardens, this also hardens. Now, what is happening? This brachioradialis is helping. Why is this called brachioradialis? Brachii, arm, radialis, radius. And you know you have the radius here. So brachioradialis. Now, so as you are flexing the elbow joint, two muscles are actually working. The major guy working is the bicep brachii, but this is also supporting this movement. So it's reinforcing the brachii. All right. Now, the muscle that is supporting the brachii is called the synergist. You see, synergist, because it is helping the agonist. All right. We call it the synergist. Now, so you see the muscle that stabilizes the joint. So it's stabilizing the joint, supporting the job of the agonist at that time, whereas the antagonist are agonizing or antagonizing rather, opposing the agonist. Now, there are some muscles that we also call fixator. The fixator are a type of synergist. What they do is to prevent the origin from moving. So they prevent the agonist so that the origin of agonist are not supposed to move, right? So they help to stabilize that origin and not let it move as well. So if, for example, now, rhomboideus muscle contract and fix the scapula while the biceps contract. Now, I will talk about this again. Now, on the other hand, I want to just clarify like I told you, I'm just going to do like structural teachings on this. I usually expect that labs take care of the details of the muscles, like what I do in my lab as well. Okay. Now, once I'm done with this, I'm going to stop this video. It's 50 minutes already. Then I'll continue another. Now, when you look at this, for instance, now, you will say that biceps are agonists. Now, that does not mean that biceps are usually and will always be agonist. It depends on the function that is being performed. So when you are flexing now, the muscle responsible for flexion is the agonist. However, when you want to extend, agonist is not the one, bicep is not the one contracting when you are extending. When you are extending, is this muscle here that is contracting the tricep. So when you are extending now, the tricep become the agonist, the bicep become the antagonist at that point. Does that make sense? So there is no rule that says that when this muscle is an agonist, it will always be an agonist. No, it depends on the movement that is being considered. So for flexion, agonist is the biceps, right? This will be the synergist, and the tricep is going to be the antagonist. But if you are doing the other way and you are extending, tricep becomes the agonist because tricep is now the one contracting at that point. All right. So I'm going to stop this video now and continue another one.